All right, we are now live. Okay, anywho, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this live stream. Benjamin Sleester, Alpha Lion Simba, and Movie Fan here. And tonight we are going to review one of my favorite TV shows from when I was younger, Redwall. A very awesome show based on the book series by the late author Brian Jacques, and each of us is going to give our thoughts on the various elements of the stories, such as the characters, the stories themselves, and a few other things. Now, a quick warning before we officially get started. Because the stories are somewhat consecutive in the context of the TV show, there will be spoilers ahead. So just wanted to let you know. But anyway, here's the general overview of the series. The Redwall TV series is based on the book series Redwall by the late great author Brian Jacques. It takes place in the fictional realm of Mossflower Country and the surrounding territories, with its central locations being the Abbey of Redwall and the mountain fortress of Salamandastron. The Abbey of Redwall is populated by anthropomorphic woodland animals and stands as a symbol of peace and security and freedom for all the animals who call Mossflower home. The TV series covers 3 books out of the total 22 that Brian Jacques wrote in his series. And one of the great things about this book series and the TV show is that each season and each book tells its own unique story, with no individual book or season telling the same story twice. Each of the 3 seasons of the show is based on a certain book with a certain story, and there are many amazing things that make this show a must-see. The series aired on PBS back in the 90s and early 2000s, and as far as the actual TV aspect is concerned, I'm going to turn you over to Movie Fan, who is the only one out of the 3 of us who ever had the privilege of seeing the show live.
Well, let's see. I think the best way to start on my perspective on this one is I came across this by accident because, truth be told, up until that point, I never heard of Redwall, and I have never read the books. Even now, I still have yet to read them, unfortunately. But what are you going to do? Eventually, I'll read them. But anyway, I came across it I was just flipping through channels. I was still watching PBS because they still had good stuff on at the time. And I came across it. And immediately, I literally, by accident again, came across the first episode, quite literally, right when it was getting started. And I was thinking to myself, Redwall, huh? I'll check it out. And here I'm seeing this beautiful animation with some very memorable characters. In fact, I've never seen a flaw in this animation at all. And that's pretty rare because usually there's always some small problem in there somewhere, like a glitch or, I don't know, anything. Granted, there are a few scenes that are kind of repeated, but they were small scenes that were not that big of a deal. But anyway, I fell in love with the show immediately because I just love how it all plays out with our character Matthias, who wants to become a warrior like his idol or hero, Martin the Warrior, who was the founder of Redwall. But of course, since... Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I totally wanted you to cover the aspects of the on-screen. I wanted you to cover the aspects of the show itself while I covered the stories.
Okay. Well, the thing is, he was, brought into Redwall because he and his sister, their village had been destroyed by Clooney the Scourge. And, his sister, unfortunately, she died when they made it to Redwall. And they taught him to try to be a mouse of peace because it's actually an abbey. Although it does look more like a castle, which is kind of unusual, actually, but that's for later. So anyway, yeah, they try to teach him to be a mouse of peace, but deep down, he just keeps getting this call from Martin himself, believe it or not. And, well, in a short time, the story unfolds to... Sorry, cat in the way. Hey, cut it out. Anyway,
Perfect.
the story unfolds that, well, it turns out they do need a warrior because Clooney the Scourge is decided to attack Redwall and make it his own little fortress. Now, the thing is, they don't have a warrior. I mean, they got an army of guards, but they don't have a real warrior to pretty much be that big hero. But they find it in Matthias as the time goes on. And what's interesting about this is how the story just continues per episode. It's a little bit tidbit here of Matthias learning that he is the warrior that they've been waiting for, without them realizing, of course. And in a way, I'll bring up that theory later. That's not important. But anyway, and along the way, they go to find his shield, his sword, and his armor. Martin's weapons, that is.
Yep.
And eventually, they do defeat Clooney the Scourge in the end of season 1. Season 2, yeah.
We'll cover season 2 after we do a more in-depth look at season 1.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to tell us about the stuff that came after the main episodes on the TV show?
Oh, yes, very much so. And this is probably my favorite part in all this. I mean, besides the storyline and the animation, I just love how this all plays out. Quite literally, at the end, whenever the episode is done with the animated sequences, of course, they always end it by making it look like a tapestry, which the story does kind of center around, actually, because it centers around a tapestry of Martin the Warrior. Excuse me. And the way the tapestry plays out, it's literally like telling the story of what just happened. Sometimes it'll be small little tidbits, like, for instance, in the end of episode 1, it's showing that they're all gathered in the Abbey. Meanwhile, Clooney's, I want to call him a ninja for the sake of argument, Shadow. He was climbing the walls, getting ready to sneak in and steal Martin off of the tapestry to bring to him, just to demoralize them a little. So, and then there's times they'll show stuff like maybe how let's see, it's been a while, folks, but it's still there. And it'll show stuff like how he met Basil Staghair and how they defeated the second attack from Clooney, that sort of thing. It'll show little tidbits here and there in the tapestry form. And it's very well done, too, actually. It really looks like an actual tapestry. So, obviously, the artists really did a good job. You can actually almost look like needle and thread, which is what a tapestry is. That was one of the best parts. And, of course, the part that really made it even more awesome for me, being a history buff, they always, since this was PBS, they always try to do a little educational stuff. So they always taught a little things here and there. Like, for instance, in one episode, they actually explained what a tapestry is. It's basically, you could call it a curtain or a rug in a way, because it is kind of like a rug. It's weaved like one, sort of, that it's used to actually keep people's homes warm. However, there is one thing I wish they would have mentioned, and unfortunately they didn't, and that's the fact that a tapestry can also tell a story. I mean, technically you're seeing that here, and if anything, I think I know the inspiration for that one for Brian Jenks, but I'll hold up on that for a minute. Anyway, and they would talk about like medieval life and the animals, of course. They would talk about animals. They would talk about the characters. And there was even a few behind the scenes moments where they would show like how it was made, how they did voiceovers and stuff like that. That was really more of a season 3 thing. But the point is, I think by that time they were kind of running out of medieval stuff to throw in there. So, they had to throw something in there. Besides, a lot of people are still interested in how it's all put together, like how they animate, how they do voiceovers, and
Yep.
what it takes to actually act when you're just doing voices. Because I think a lot of us would know there's a big difference between acting on the stage and just reading a script and acting in front of a microphone. So,
Yep.
very big difference. It's a lot harder. So,
considering that for the most part in animation, voice actors record their lines separate from the rest of the cast, give or take a few exceptions.
that's true. That's very true. Most of the time, that it's just them alone right in there. Very seldom have they ever had like two together or something like that. And that's being modest in this case. So
Yeah.
it goes to show you how talented these voice actors really are. Besides having millions of different voices, like Jim Cummings, for instance, just the best example I got right now.
Yeah.
And of course, it was even more awesome to see that they also did little interviews with Brian Jenks himself, in a way, because the kids would ask a question on a video screen, like, where did those crazy accents come from on there? And of course, he would say, like, well, they're not crazy accents. They're actually native to the British Isles. And he would say, like, they were basic, well, like, for instance, they were different dialects. If I remember correctly, I think he said the accent used for the moles, formal to be precise, was more like an ancient language used in Britain back in, I think, the, 14th century. I think. I could be off. But either way, they...
exactly right.
But, yeah. And, he also talked about, like, his inspirations for some of the characters, I believe, if I remember correctly, Asmodeus, the snake, or Poison Teeth, if you want to go with, because he was nicknamed that too. He got that inspiration from the Bible, because the name actually comes from the Bible. Asmodeus, I forget how this goes. I'm not very religious. We'll leave it at that. But, it's just that he either worked for the devil or it was another name for him. That's where he got it from, believe it or not. And then, of course, I think just about everybody's favorite lovable character, Basil Stagg Hare. He talked about that he was actually someone he knew. And I did a little research just recently, finding out about how he knew his inspiration there. He actually worked for him. That's how he knew him. And apparently he was in the old war, as they put it. By that, they mean World War I, the first one. And apparently he had a big mustache, kind of like Basil seems to have in a way. But I've seen the image of Basil, online as the book character. And obviously his mustache is a lot bigger. So that kind of speaks for itself. Had to be the First World War. In the series, they make him look more, well, like a proper rabbit, So,
hair.
Oh, yes, a hare. That's right, a hare.
That's a thing you need to remember. It's covered in both the TV show and the books that if you call hares rabbits in the Redwall universe, that is an incredible insult to them.
Right. And his name is Basil Stagg Hare. I forgot. But yeah.
Just a little bit of trivia for you.
Of course. Well, like I said, I never read the books, so that's news to me. But I believe it. But at the same time, his character was based off of his former boss that he worked for, because he had that mustache and he would say stuff like, "Hey, what? So he based it off of him. And it has been proven that many authors do base some characters off of people they knew.
Exactly right. And well, thank you for giving us the outside of story aspects of the show, movie fan. That was very much appreciated.
Sure, no problem.
And now we come to talking about the stories that each season tells. And a quick thing before we get into that, another thing that's interesting about the Redwall series, both the TV show and the books, is that, give or take a few exceptions, it's very easy for you to tell who the good guys and the bad guys are. Because you can basically put the bad guys and the good guys into one of two groups: vermin and woodlanders. If you're a woodlander, that means that you're a mouse, a squirrel, a hare, a badger, an otter, a shrew, a hedgehog, a mole, or creatures like that. If you're a vermin, that means you're a rat, a weasel, a stoat, a ferret, a fox, a carrion bird, almost all kinds of reptiles, pine martens, and wildcats.
Yep. Definitely.
And so now comes the part that I need both of you to help me with, and that's giving an in-depth look, thoughts, and descriptions of each of the 3 seasons of the show, and describing our favorite parts, moments, and describing the characters as well. I think we'll have some good fun with this, so let's get started. As Movie Fan already said, the premise of the first season, which is also the first book of the series, Redwall, is that it is the summer of the late rose in Mossflower Country, and the animals of Redwall Abbey have gathered to hold a feast in honor of their leader, Abbot Mortimer's Golden Jubilee. But, as Movie Fan already stated, trouble is on the horizon as Clooney the Scourge, the most evil rat ever seen, has come to Mossflower with his army of rats and weasels with the intention of conquering the abbey and enslaving all of Mossflower. The young mouse, Matthias, who is a novice of the peaceful order of Redwall brothers and sisters, is the only one who stands between Clooney and his wicked goals, and in order to do that, Matthias sets out on a quest for the long-lost sword of Martin and the Warrior, Redwall's founder and first great defender. And, with the help of friends, Matthias does eventually succeed in claiming the sword, and leads the final charge in the fight to defeat Clooney and save all of Redwall.
Yep.
And now, let's hear what you guys have to say about what you think of season 1 overall, and then I'll give my thoughts, and then we'll describe the characters. Thomas, you want to start?
Sure. Well, for season 1, I thought that the story was very well paced. All the characters were memorable in their own certain ways, especially with how enjoyable Basil was, or how formidable of a villain Clooney was. I mean, you see this rat in action. He is evil. He is menacing. He shows no mercy to those he opposes. And in terms of faithfulness to the book, I'm about midway through the book that season 1 was based off of, and for the most part, it's pretty similar. So yeah, I have to give it kudos for faithfulness.
There are a few liberties that season 1 took. Like, for example, certain episodes of the TV show did not take place in the book. But I can forgive that because I think they did it primarily to increase the stakes and give us some lighthearted moments. Movie fan?
Well, like I said, the minute I saw this show, I immediately fell in love with it. And I totally agree, Alpha. The pacing is great on this. Usually I don't bring that up, but in this case, it's one of those kind of things where, since the story literally plays out per episode, and it's literally down the line. It's not like most TV shows where, like you watch, well, you just pick anything you like, and you watch one episode, and clearly the next episode that comes next week doesn't correspond with the first. This one, it's literally going down the line in the story. And if there was a day that I accidentally missed an episode because something came up, I'm like, oh no, what I miss? And that's a good thing, because if you end up going like that, you're definitely interested in what happened next. And when they played this show again later on, because it was in syndication for a while, I try to make sure I caught every episode that I missed just to make sure. So, yeah, the pacing is great, and the characters, they are definitely lovable, and of course, your villains, they're great too. I mean, I like Clooney the Scourge. I mean, he's evil and all that, but I like his character. It just screams out villain every which way. And plus, I think it's so unique how, for him, his main weapon is his tail. He's got that barbed sword on the end of it, or more like a hook sword in a way. Very unique. You don't see that in too many characters in general.
Yep. And speaking of the characters, we're going to now take an in-depth look at each one with Thomas. Would you be so kind as to get the drawings so that we can provide visual aids to our audience, please?
Alrighty.
Go to your bag first so that we have the main ones for the ones for this season.
I see now.
While he's doing that, would you like to give us some of your favorite moments from the show, movie fan?
Well, let's see. I think, in general, I think it would be, like I said, this the way the story plays out, and the way it just plays off like they're on that quest to find the sword, but it's little tidbits, little pieces of the puzzle, like how they figure out that, well, for instance, when we keep hearing the words, I am that is, which is written on the tapestry because that was a code, but truth be told, it actually translates to I, Matthias. Obviously, Martin knew that Matthias would be, the next warrior. And in fact, truth be told, I mean, like I said, I never read the books, so I don't know if they were going for this or not, or if they just took a liberty with it. But it almost feels like he knew that he was going to be, like, for lack of a better way, reincarnated. Because, again, I, Matthias, he knew exactly. And when they found his tomb underneath the W in Redwall written on the stairs, which if you look the other direction, looks like the letter M, well, his tomb, they said that he looked just like Matthias, actually. And, of course, behind the door, they find, I think, his belt and his shield. And then they put the shield up on the highest tower in the Redwall to see where the sword was. Of course, the sparrows had it. But then it turns out that it was actually stolen by Asmodeus a long time ago. So they had to find out where does Asmodeus live so they could get the sword back. And even though this isn't a huge part in the story, there was a small moment where they accidentally find the armor of Martin hidden up in the attic. I wish they would have had more of that, because I'm a sucker for medieval history, and I would have loved to see more of that armor. That's just all there is to it. That's just me talking, though, so I wouldn't take. So everybody could take that with a grain of salt. It's not really that big of a deal anyway. But I just love that.
Yeah, that's understandable. I'd have to say that I had a lot of favorite moments from season 1, but in particular, well, obviously this is one of my favorite parts because I did my own semi-spoof of that scene. I loved the final fight between Matthias and Clooney.
Definitely.
That was epic. And if you saw on my video where I extended the fight and played it with Lion King music, you'd see exactly what I mean.
Yes, I think I did, actually.
Yep. And speaking of our characters, here are the pictures of each of them. And here we go. First up, this is our main hero, Matthias. Now, looking at him, you may not think he doesn't look much. which you would think that at first, since he's only 13 years old and just a novice at Redwall Abbey. But trust me, this young mouse I have ever seen in a fiction story. He knows how to do what's right, and he's not afraid to break the rules if that's what's needed to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. That about sums him up perfectly.
Mm-hmm. Next, we have one of the elders of Redwall Abbey and my mother's favorite character, Constance the Badger. Like I said, she's one of the elders of Redwall Abbey. What? Stupid tech issues.
Yeah.
Anyway, Constance is one of the elders of Redwall Abbey, and being a badger, she's one of the few members of the Abbey who actually possesses some fighting skills. And the thing I like about Constance is, which is also why my mother likes her, is that she's a perfect combination of tough, but also caring and motherly. What do you guys think about Constance?
Yeah, that basically sums her up perfectly. In fact, the tough part of her personality also really highlights how tough badgers in real life can be.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And in a way, she also proves to be wise in her own right, because, there have been plenty of times, like when Clooney first showed up, or, Stella and Chicken Hound showed up, and the abbot believed them. She was saying several times, "You're making a mistake. They can't be trusted." And she was right. So.
Mm-hmm. Which that brings us to one of the characters that I myself have mixed feelings about in season 1, the ruler of Redwall Abbey, Abbot Mortimer. Now, in his defense, he is a good leader and he has the well-being of his creatures at heart, but there are many times throughout the show where I'm pretty sure all three of us had to be disrespectful and call him a stupid old fool.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
most definitely. Like, I remember on my last rewatch of season 1 before I actually read the book, I feel when he insisted that they still not fight, even after Clooney made his threats very clear, I was just like, are you serious? This guy just listed death threats out to you, and you still want to go about it peacefully? Because clearly, peace is not an option with this guy.
Nope.
Mm-hmm. And that's not the only time. You were right when you mentioned how he was willing to listen to Stella and Chicken Hound. But for me, the two biggest you stupid idiot moments for Abbot Mortimer come in episode 6, High Standards, and episode 8, Battle Plans. And I think, and what happened in that, for those of you who are not in the know, is that in that episode, Clooney was tightening his grip around Redwall and getting the Abbey dwellers sniping at each other. And when Clooney was getting ready to make his final assault, the abbot actually contemplated
Uh-oh, tech issues again. Oh, dear. George, will you quit nipping me in the arm? Thanks. Oh, dear.
Oh, okay, we're back. Sorry about that.
Well, what were you saying, Benjamin? I'm sorry. I couldn't get that.
I was saying that The abbot does deserve credit for wanting to protect the creatures in his care, but at the same time, that would have been the stupidest thing for him to possibly do. Because, as Matthias said,
yeah,
he's wrong. Clooney will accept our surrender and make us his slaves.
that's what he said.
Which would have led to infinitely more bloodshed.
Definitely.
And an equally big "you stupid idiot" moment was in battle plans after Constance, Basil, and Matthias attempted and failed to assassinate Clooney with that giant crossbow. Now, granted, they didn't know that they had killed the wrong rat, but the abbot was adamant and that they reduced the double guards now that he thought Clooney was dead.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, the old mythology, cut the snake off at the head and the body dies. That's not true. Someone else will just take over. That's the truth.
Well, cut off the snake and the body will die. He irks a lot in the Redwall series, and it does work somewhat in the real world too, but I see your point. And besides, we the viewers knew that the Abbey was still very much in danger because, as stated earlier, and I'm sure all three of us just kept screaming it at the TV show, you killed the wrong rat.
Yep. Yep.
Which, speaking of, that brings us to our next character. The villain of the show himself, Clooney the Scourge. Yeah, and what Thomas said earlier about his description is spot on. This rat is pure evil. There is not a scrap of goodness in his heart.
Just like Jenner from the Rats of Nim. Or the
I'd say he's pretty much Jenner on steroids.
And in medieval Europe.
Yeah, that too. Because, like I said, he shows no mercy to those he opposes, but not just to his enemies, but also to those within his own army. I mean, give or take a few exceptions, he mostly gave them beatings if they made him angry, but there have been a few times where if you make him angry or get on the wrong side of him, it's pretty much the last thing you ever do. Such was the case with Cheese Thief.
Yep. Not to mention, he also had a big ego. I don't know how many people have ever caught this, because how many times was he always kind of rethinking his name? In fact, during the final battle against Matthias, when Matthias was up in the bell tower, he said that he gives him his word, from a warrior to a warlord. And he goes, "Warlord? Clooney the Warlord awaits you!" Because he just loved that title so much. It was even better than being Clooney the Scourge. Because he really did have an ego. He would show it here and there. So.
Yep. And that, but there was one good thing going for the Redwallers up till the final battle. Throughout, even after they got the Tapestry of Martin back, the spirit of Martin tormented Clooney in his nightmares.
That's true.
And who can forget that when Cornflower and Silent Sam discovered Martin's armor, that just the sight of that armor sent Clooney running away like a scared kid.
Oh, yes.
And that's because of something I just realized. Somewhere deep in his dark heart, Clooney knew that he couldn't defeat the Redwallers.
That, and coming from a practical aspect, that would be called psychological warfare, because how many times was he seeing Martin in his nightmares? And that kind of wears on you
Yeah.
after a while, because he did say that was bothering him, how much he kept appearing in his nightmares.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And an interesting bit of trivia there's actually two interesting bits of trivia about Clooney. There's several interesting bits of trivia about Clooney here. Like, for example, even in his appearance here, there's several things that you are not told in the TV show, but you are in the books that demonstrate just how wicked he is even more. Because his cape, that's not tattered leather. That is literally made of bat wings.
Oh, wow.
It's fastened at the throat by a mole skull, and the reason why he wears that eye patch is because years ago his eye was torn out in battle with a pikefish. Now, granted, the pike got the worst end of the encounter because Clooney killed it, but still, that's not something to be sneezed at.
Definitely not.
What's more is that the spike on Clooney's tail, that's not just an average battle spike. That thing's poisoned.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot all about that.
Yep, it's poisoned, all right. And this happened in the book, but I interpret it as happening. It is happening off screen in the TV show. Clooney is the reason that Abbot Mortimer was mortally wounded after the final battle.
Yeah, because you never saw him really get wounded. You see him clobbering people with a stick and saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, please forgive me," because it goes against his moral character, because he's not. Because he's a mouse of peace. That's what the thing is.
Yeah, that actually was pretty funny. It was almost like in The Hunchback of Notre Dame when the gargoyles were helping fight against the soldiers. Victor drops a brick on top of one of the soldiers and he goes, "Sorry, sorry."
Yeah. Come to think of it, there was another film that did something like that too, Dragonheart. There was a friar who was shooting arrows. Yeah, he actually turned out to be a natural archer, but of course, because he was a friar, killing people was wrong. But he did do some gags, like he shot one guy in the butt, and he says, "Turn the other cheek, brother," just because, And most of the time, he's like, "Oh, I don't know but he did do the right thing. He set off traps, and of course, turned the other cheek just because it was funny. But yeah, so
yeah, But yeah, in all seriousness, though, the abbot was mortally wounded because Clooney struck him with that poison spike on his tail. And I think that's probably, I have a theory that Clooney probably struck the abbot just before Cornflower attempted to attack him with that iron spike she picked up.
Most likely, they had to tone it down for the kids because PBS was above showing, people getting killed, so to speak. There was, anything gory, that is, or anything that could suggest. It's more implied rather than shown. Like, for instance, when Chicken Hound killed, well, technically he led to the death of Methuselah by hitting him over the head with that, what was it again, a big candlestick or something?
Candelabra.
Yeah, candelabra. I mean, you see him strike the blow, but you don't see him actually hit him, not exactly. You know that's what happened. They give you the impression.
Yeah, the only time I can think of off the top of my head where they actually showed the thing was when Matthias killed Asmodeus.
Yeah, that's true.
I remember when I watched this for the first time with Ben, I was like, "Whoa, dang, this was on PBS."
Yeah, not to mention it, on the tapestry part, you see him standing on top of Asmodeus, and his head is chopped off right there, and you see like the old circle and the bone and the what looks like would be where the blood would be on his neck. I mean, it's not oozing; it's just like you chopped a steak in half kind of look.
I think they got away with that because it was done to a villain. So we're meant to not care as much.
That, and like I said, it's a tapestry, so it doesn't look gory or anything. It just looks
Speaking of,
like so. Oh, go ahead.
well, speaking of which, we have 2 more members of the principal cast of season 1 to cover before I think we're good to move on. And one of them, of course, is everybody's favorite,
Basil Staghair, my boy.
Hind leg fighter and camouflage expert.
Hey, that's pretty good.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks. It's been a while since I've heard his voice.
Well,
Oh, yeah.
that's something for both you and everyone watching this video to know also. All 3 seasons are available for watching on various channels here on YouTube. So if you ever get the chance, go watch it again.
It's worth it.
I know I did, and I remember after I got done reading Martin the Warrior, that's exactly what I did. I went back and watched it.
I'll have to rewatch it one of these days because I just want to.
Well, I don't blame you.
Yeah, nor do I.
Anyway, and then we don't have a picture of this final character from season 1, but another important member of the principal cast to talk about is Cornflower Fieldmouse, Matthias's love interest. Yeah. Well, she's a little more peaceful than Matthias is, but honestly, as the series progresses, you can tell they're just made for each other.
Yep.
And honestly, I can't blame Matthias for falling for Cornflower because, well, one of the characters said it himself in episode 9. She's a rare beauty.
Yeah, that was Fallow the Dormouse, if I remember correctly.
Yep, Farlow the Dormouse.
Yep.
Which, by the way, according to Ben, the events that transpired in that episode did not happen in the book, but still, it was a great episode.
Very much so.
Yeah, it showed Matthias and Cornflower's relationship being put to the test, and it just showed further, or what I've always known about Clooney, that there is no depth of depravity he won't sink to.
Yeah, definitely.
In fact, I said it in the live stream where I first met you, movie fan.
Yep.
Clooney makes Professor Ratigan from The Great Mouse Detective look like an absolute nice guy.
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
So, do you have any more thoughts you guys want to add for season 1 before we move on?
Well, I would like to acknowledge Asmodeus because he was quite an interesting character.
We actually do have a picture of Asmodeus here.
Oh, even better yet. Yeah, there he is, old Poison Teeth. Yep. I love his character because just the way he keeps coming up out of nowhere, just saying his name, Asmodeus. Come with me, young Foxy. I will show you eternity. Love that method. His hypnotic approach, and of course, you really see more of him using that when he tries to hypnotize Matthias. Because usually he just keeps saying his name and I will show you eternity. But in this case, he's really putting the hypnosis at work when he's saying, look into my eyes and you will find peace. That sort of thing. Very good work. The voice actor who played him was perfect. Definitely. I just love it.
Yeah, I described Asmodeus as like if you took Disney's version of Kaa from the Jungle Book and basically multiply it by 20.
Definitely.
Yeah, I could totally agree with that because Asmodeus was obvious this throughout the show that even though Clooney was the main villain, Mossflower still had a significant secondary threat in Asmodeus.
Definitely. And can you imagine that if they took a different approach originally? Let's say Brian Jacques, assuming if he ever decided to have Asmodeus meet Clooney the Scourge, can you imagine how that might have ended up? You know,
That thought actually did cross my mind. What would have happened if if as one of their tactics for fighting the war, what if the Redwallers led Asmodeus to Clooney's camp?
I imagine that would have been interesting. He was big enough to be a python. Well, by their standards, he was giant beyond belief.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like a Titanoboa.
But
or like Rattlesnake Jake in the movie Rango, because he was bigger than everybody.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Minus the machine gun tail, of course.
Of course.
Yes, but still, he wasn't called Poison Teeth for no reason.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah. And other noteworthy characters from season 1, which I'll just give you quick glimpses of include the following. Warbeak.
Oh, yep.
One of Matthias's friends from when he made allies of the Sparrow colony that lives within Redwall.
Mm-hmm.
Brother Methuselah,
Yeah.
who was kind of like a grandfather figure to Matthias.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It was a shame that when they killed him off,
No.
because he was a wise one. He really was.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that the TV show did something a little different than the book, because we got a little more time with Methuselah in the TV show, because in the book, when Chicken Hound fatally injured him, he died almost instantly.
Mm. It's too bad.
And then, of course, there's another villain in season 1 who often gets overlooked.
King Bull Sparrow.
Mm-hmm. I didn't acknowledge him as a villain at first, but then I read about some facts in the book that totally guarantee him villain status. Because as Warbeak's mother Dunwing said, King Bull Sparrow one day went hunting for worms with Warbeak's father, Greytail, and it was during that hunt that they took Martin's sword with them. And when they were attacked by Asmodeus, Bull Sparrow, in his fright, dropped the sword and ordered Greytail to get the sword back. Greytail tried, but was bit by Asmodeus. Greytail survived long enough for them to get back to the Abbey and relate the story of what happened to Dunwing before he died.
Shame.
But do you know what Bull Sparrow told the rest of the colony happened?
No.
He told the rest of the colony that Greytail had been killed in a battle with some starlings, and that he had saved King Bull Sparrow's life.
Oh, brother.
And to make matters worse, after Greytail's death, King Bull Sparrow promised that he would take care of his sister and her daughter as long as they remained loyal to him, but he completely forgot about that promise, and so Dunwing and Warbeak were left to fend for themselves, basically.
No wonder they turned on him so easily.
Mm-hmm.
I remember Ben told me that when we were working on our countdowns, and all those details alone guaranteed Bull Sparrow a spot on my list.
Yeah. even though I hadn't read the book, like I said, I regarded him as villainous in his own right. By comparison, more like a minor villain in the series because, well, he held Matthias prisoner for no good reason, really. And on top of that, he tried to pretty much do away with him, and he did try to do away with him.
But thankfully, when he tried to kill Matthias at the end of episode 4, Matthias managed to send them both falling into the Abbey Pond. And even though Matthias survived, Bull Sparrow was not so lucky.
Nope. Yeah, Brian Jenks even described him as crazy during the interview part at the end when they talked about the characters. King Bull Sparrow came up, so.
Yeah. And it's interesting, Thomas hasn't gotten to that part yet, but when Matthias was pulled out of the Abbey Pond, it's revealed that he was more badly injured than we got in the TV show, because Bull Sparrow's beak was literally stuck in his shoulder when they got him out of the pond. And so that pretty much. So unless you guys have anything else you want to add about season 1, I think we'll move on.
I think what we've said pretty much sums up season 1 perfectly.
I think so. Anything I want to add will come later. Just a small tidbits of information of one's a theory and the other one is, well, talking about the Abbey itself, but that can wait. So.
Oh, that's perfect. That's perfectly fine.
Of course.
Well, anyway, now we're moving on to season 2, which is book 3 of the TV show, Matameo. This is a sequel. This is a sequel to the first season, and it goes thus: 8 seasons have passed since Matthias defeated Clooney the Scourge, and Redwall Abbey prepares a feast to celebrate the summer of the Golden Plain. But trouble once again comes to the Abbey, this time in the form of the fox, Slagar the Cruel, and his band of slavers. Through cunning and treachery, Slagar infiltrates Redwall and kidnaps 5 of Redwall's children, including Matthias's son, Matameo. With the aid of his friends, Matthias sets out on a quest to rescue his son, while back at the Abbey, the evil raven, General Ironbeak, has come down from the north with his army of blackbirds to try and conquer Redwall and do what Clooney had tried to do years earlier.
Yeah.
And so, now that we've got the premise out of the way, let's go ahead and discuss the characters. Starting with our new main hero, Matthias's son, Matameo. I'm going to let Thomas talk about this, lead this character discussion, if that's okay.
Sure. Well, basically, like Ben said, Matameo was abducted along with some other children from the Abbey, and he definitely does take after his father because he showed the same leadership skills, and he was a master tactician on top of that, inherited his father's smarts.
And part of the reason why why Matameo grows throughout the season is he starts off as kind of a spoiled brat at the Abbey because the residents of the Abbey are so grateful to Matthias for having rid them of Clooney so long ago that they give Matameo special attention. And as a result of that, Matameo gets in trouble for getting into a fight with a rat named Vitch, who was visiting the Abbey. However, it's revealed later that Matameo was right to fight Bitch because he was a spy for Slagar the Cruel.
Yep.
Which the ironic thing is, Slagar is not a newcomer to the Abbey. He's actually a blast from the past. It's revealed in episode 2 of season 1 it's revealed in episode 2 of season 2 that Slagar is actually a grown-up chicken hound.
Yeah, it's kind of a twist that pertains to the villain, kind of like with King Candy and Wreck-It Ralph, but not in a sense that a character's established, they come back later, and all of a sudden, boom, they evil. But no, this is actually Chicken Hound all grown up.
Mm-hmm. It turns out that when Asmodeus bit him, Chicken Hound was only knocked unconscious, and he later woke up in Asmodeus's lair, escaping while the giant serpent was still asleep. And throughout the years following, he changed his name to Slagar the Cruel, donned this mask to hide his gruesome facial injuries,
which they did show one time.
Mm-hmm. And he gained quite a reputation as a slaver and mercenary. And one of the cool things about Slagar in season 2 is he is voiced by the legendary Tim Curry.
Ideal casting for a villain because, like I said in the Don Bluth video, Tim Curry can just read the phone book, and it would still sound deliciously evil.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
So, what do you guys think of Slagar?
He's definitely one of the best Redwall villains out there, and so far, I say the most evil fox I've ever come across. And at one point in the show, he gives a stark reminder to one of the biggest rules to remember in the Redwall universe.
Never trust vermin.
Yeah, well, in his case, never trust a fox.
Yep.
Because I've been reading a few of the Redwall books, and dang near every fox I've come across, they're double crossers.
Mm-hmm. But the ironic thing that's revealed toward the end of season 2 is that Slagar is not an independent agent. He actually works for another villain, Malkaris.
Yep.
And this is his boss. This is not the form that Malkaris would want you to see him in, but this is what he really looks like. And trust me, it's just as hideous in the TV show as it looks here.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Malkaris has hired Slagar to capture or young creatures for him so that he can build a kingdom for himself under where the ancient abbey of Loamhedge used to stand. And once that kingdom is complete, he will be total lord of this underground kingdom.
Yep.
And this, though not nearly as important, is Malkaris's right-hand man, or should I say, right-hand rat, Nadaz.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But other important characters that you meet in Matameo, of course, Matthias is Cornflower, Basil Staghair, and Constance return, and they're just as good in this season as they were in the previous one.
Yep.
Although I have to say, the successor to the role of Abbott from Abbott Mortimer, Abbott Mordalphus, he has a little more sense than his predecessor did.
He does. Because he didn't believe anything about those ravens, except for the trade-off between their prisoners and the magpies that they had prisoners. I'll admit, one could have easily been tricked like that to, not see what he was really trying to pull. It was really a diversion so they could steal the rest of the, what were they, cherries out in the orchard or something? Or
What was happening was, as in that episode, General Ironbeak, the secondary villain of the season, he prolonged the exchange of prisoners to give his army enough time to conquer the majority of the Abbey, thus restricting the Woodlanders to Cavern Hold, while some of his army invaded the orchard to load up on food supplies.
If I remember correctly, I think that's what they mostly did for the series. The book, I'm positive, was different, though, was it?
No, actually it wasn't, because they did. It went the same way in the book. Ironbeak prolonged the prisoner exchange, giving his army enough time to raid the orchard and take over the infirmary and dormitories, thus restricting all of the Redwallers to Cavern Hold.
Oh, yeah, it's coming back to me now. I remember the orchard parts. That's the one that stuck out the most. So, yeah. Okay, yeah. It's been a while, folks, like I said, so.
And that's perfectly fine, which we don't have a... Thomas didn't give me a picture of him handy, but overall, what did y'all think of General Ironbeak?
He's definitely one of the most formidable bird villains I've ever come across in any animal fantasy thing I've seen or read, let alone Redwall.
I would say he was a pretty interesting character. He was definitely a better leader than Clooney was. By comparison, he was more tactful. Because, Clooney, although he used his viciousness to really kind of lead things, but Ironbeak was more tactful. I mean, like we talked about with him prolonging that exchange just so they could take over a good part of it. Granted, he also relied on mysticism as well, because what was the other one's name? The one who could see visions? It's been a long time. Yeah. I mean, he tried to get, ideas as to what they could do to give themselves an edge. But, of course, Martin kept blocking his visions by just showing himself in his visions. Like he kept saying, my visions are blocked by a mouse in armor. I can't see anything further.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yes, sir.
But Ironbeak does still have points on the brutality factor, because every single time Martin's ghost was mentioned, he would fly, pun intended, into a rage and give Mangas and all the other birds in the vicinity savage beatings.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
I wouldn't consider Ironbeak to be as dangerous as Clooney, but he definitely wasn't a pushover.
Definitely not a bird to be sneezed at.
No, definitely not.
Mm-hmm. Which is why it was all the more good in the final 3 episodes that the Redwallers acquired a new ally in Strike Redkite.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was a bird who had the size and strength to fight Ironbeak on even terms. Heck, early on in their final duel, Ironbeak realized that Strike was too big and powerful for him, and that's why he had to call in his soldiers to hold her down.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the final battle commenced, Ironbeak knew he would be no match for Strike, so he basically flew for his life.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, Strike caught him in the end, though. And the interesting thing is, according to the book, even though Ironbeak did make one last squawk when Strike struck him, he was dead before he hit the ground because of how hard she struck.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings us to some other noteworthy characters in Matameo. Oh, in particular, this new friend that Matthias and company met on their quest to rescue the children. Orlando the Axe, a badger warrior from the Western Plains who also has a score to settle with Slagar because he kidnapped his daughter, Alma.
Yep.
And some of the other slaves that Matameo interacts with are pretty good characters too. Like Alma, Orlando's daughter, acts as kind of a protector and mother figure for the other slaves while still waiting for rescue.
Yep.
And who can forget at Matameo's love interest, Tess Churchmouse? Because she did a very good job of smoothing out Matameo's tempers and helping him to realize what he needed to do, and that he needed to be his father to the other slaves.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Definitely.
Mm-hmm. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about some of our favorite moments from Matameo. Would you like to start, Thomas?
Well, for me, it would basically have to be any time that they were fighting against General Ironbeak, and heck, even the climax, especially the part where Slagar got his just desserts.
Mm-hmm. Because basically, he tried futilely to fight against both Matthias and Orlando.
Yep.
And Matthias and Orlando both basically ended up pushing him down a well.
Yep.
Yep, and after that, it was just, thanks for playing.
Mm-hmm. How about you, movie fan?
Well, let's see. I love the adventure aspect of both stories because they all kind of tie into each other. Especially when in the series, I don't know if this happened in the book, how the new abbot had, like you said, he had a better head on his shoulders than the
Abbott
first
Mortimer.
Abbott Mortimer. Yeah, sorry, I don't know. Anyway, Abbott Mortimer. Yeah, because when they were trying to find a way that they could try to help Matthias, and this was before Ironbeak showed up, he said that what they should do is go to sleep and dream. Obviously, he had a feeling that he could maybe get an answer from Martin. And Martin did tell him, give him a clue, seek the founder in the stones where the little folk go. And they found in a hidden tunnel down below the abbey where the actual builder of Redwall had actually had some old stone artifacts written. And it was a statue of that builder with the stone art tablets, giving a description of where to go. And even a little clue of a little ant that was holding the tablets together, little folk and, little ants. Very clever. I just love puzzles like that when they do these things. As long as they don't make it too complicated, like I've seen some things do. Some of them take it too far, but this was great. And it was the baby who figured it out a good lot of the time, for crying out loud. That was the best part. The baby kept figuring it out.
Yeah. Baby Rollo was very cute.
He was. And he was a very memorable character, too, because, he was, like I said, he kept figuring out all the puzzles.
But Rollo did lose some points one time, though, because he was the reason that Cornflower, Mrs. Churchmouse, and himself ended up getting kidnapped by Ironbeak's birds.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there's lots of things in the book that I can say he definitely explain some of the gaps that are left in screen. Like, for example, it's describable in the episode Feathered Friends and Foes. It's mentioned somewhere that the reason why Warbeak, who was now Queen of the Sparrows at this time, was mortally wounded after the battle with Stonefleck ex Rats, was because Stonefleck had shot her at some point.
That's too bad.
Mm-hmm. And not to mention that excuse me, and not to mention they described that hundreds of sparrows followed Warbeak to bring those clues to Matthias, but only 5 returned to the Abbey. And of those 5, we saw only 3 managed to relay the message to the Redwallers, because the other 2 were killed by Ironbeak's birds.
Yeah.
Yep. But all in all, I thought that was a pretty good story too, because it was a good follow-up to the first show. It had, as always, memorable characters.
Of course.
Yeah.
You definitely wanted Matthias and company to succeed in their goal to rescue the kids after you saw what their future would be had they been left to serve Malcaris.
Yeah.
Because you get to a point in episode 10, I think it is. Oh yeah, episode 10, because that's when you're first introduced to Malcaris, where you just see young creatures all over this underground realm working to buildings and stuff, and they're not doing it willingly. They're being whipped and beaten by hordes of black-robed rats in order to carry out Malcaris's demands.
Yeah.
Now, in fact, I remember Ben actually made a comparison between that and the sect of Claudandus when I showed him Felidae. That they're practically similar.
Really?
Mm-hmm. I did mention that because Malcaris doesn't show his true form to his rats or really anybody when he communicates with them. He always speaks to them in this giant statue of a polecat, which bears no resemblance whatsoever to what he really looks like.
Nope.
Mm-hmm. And you definitely got to give Malcaris credit as a villain, because even though he's not as dangerous as his minion Slagar, he was definitely still cunning enough to keep Slagar under his claw.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And Tim Curry's performance as Slagar, enough said there.
Yeah. Totally.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so you got anyone got anything else they want to add about season 2?
I think what we all said pretty much sums it up perfectly.
Yep.
Alrighty. Then we will go to what Thomas and I just finished watching tonight in order to finish preparing for this, the final season of the TV show, Martin the Warrior.
Yep.
And the premise is this. Years after Matthias returned to Redwall with Matimeo, because Matthias does successfully rescue his son and return to the Abbey, the Redwallers gather one winter's day to hear the origin story of their founder and first great hero, Martin the Warrior.
Yeah.
The tale takes place countless years prior to Matthias and Matameo's days, at a place far, far away from Mossflower Country called Marshank. An evil stoat named Badrang the Tyrant rules there with an iron fist, and he dreamed of one day being lord of the entire eastern coast. Among the many creatures enslaved at Marshank is the young mouse Martin, who with the aid of some friends escapes from slavery and vows to one day return to Marshank with two goals. One, to liberate his fellow captives and free the eastern coast, and two, to reclaim his father, Luke the Warrior's sword, which Badrang stole from Martin when he was just a child.
Mm-hmm.
And now we come to talking about the characters. First and foremost, our main hero and the founder of Redwall Abbey himself, Martin the Warrior.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And what can I say about Martin? Well, he's the quintessential hero. Has a good heart, fights for what's right, and he has an incorruptible sense of morality. Truly worthy of being called one of the Redwall series' greatest heroes.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys think of Martin?
Yeah, that basically sums him up perfectly. In fact, a part of me even described him as if you took Simba and turned him into a mouse, because Martin's courage matches Simba's perfectly, especially during the climax.
Mm-hmm. How about you, movie fan?
Well, I think you pretty much said it all, because he was the type of hero that he came from basically nothing in this case, but he managed to muster an army and defeat Batarang and his army. That's quintessential here. That's a quintessential hero right there.
Yep.
Indeed.
And when Martin eventually passed away of old age after founding King Redwall's order, his spirit stayed on to remain the guardian angel of his abbey.
Yep.
In fact, many Redwall fans have come to refer to him as the mouse version of Jesus.
I can see why.
Mm-hmm.
That's going a little too far in my opinion.
I have to agree.
But I see where they're coming from, though.
Yeah.
Some other important characters to note in Martin the Warrior here. Well, two of them, I'm sad to say, are tragic fated characters.
Yeah.
One of them being this guy, Feldo, a young squirrel who was a fellow slave of Badrang's. Feldo was every bit as much a warrior as Martin was, but he had a few flaws. One of which being that even though he had his heart in the right place, he let his hatred of Badrang cloud his judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Yeah. I mean, Feldo was right towards the later end of the season when he said that all the escaped slaves of Marshank had to form an army and stop Badrang before he grew any stronger. But at the same time, he let his desire for revenge get in the way of the greater goal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In fact, before this live stream, Ben and I were watching the last 3 episodes of season 3, and he basically summed up Feldo's desire for revenge against Badrang is almost like a parallel between Copper's desire for revenge after what happened to Chief in The Fox and the Hound. Because up until this point, Feldo was showing signs that he was entering the blood wrath, but Juniper's death ultimately ended up being the final straw that finally set him off.
And in case you don't know what the blood wrath is, movie fan, that's an affliction that many warriors in the Redwall series, most of the time badgers, suffer from, that causes them to go berserk in the midst of battle. Basically, the way I can describe the blood wrath is like this. Imagine hating an evil person so much that even if that person had 10,000 soldiers standing between you and them, you would risk life and limb, killing and slaying in left and right, ignoring everything until you had either or killed your arch enemy or died trying.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I believe from a military perspective, they call it being blood drunk. It's the amateur historian talking here. It's been called being blood drunk, or even berserker mode, so to speak, because the Vikings would do stuff like that at times. But that's an entirely different matter by comparison. It really is. There's a lot more to it than that. But it's not uncommon. Once again, Brian Jenks really did his homework when he told his stories.
I'd pretty much describe the blood wrath as being very similar to what bull elephants are like when they go into must, where they feel like they just gotta attack anything that moves.
That fits too.
Yep. And there actually were some cases of blood. Feldo's is actually not the only case of blood wrath that you see in the TV show, because Matthias experienced the blood wrath during the battle in the kingdom of Malcaris, is when he slew his way through Malcaris's rats to try and reach his son.
Yeah.
But anyway, in the book, and I translate this as happening in the TV show off screen, after Feldo was attacked by Badrang's soldiers, after Badrang called for help during their duel, Feldo didn't just fight Badrang's troops, and then die. He actually took a good number of his assailants with him. In fact, it's actually described in the book this way. In the book, Badrang sent 30 soldiers to attack Feldo. Only 10 of them survived. Feldo managed to kill 20 of his attackers before he finally died.
Moments like this have actually happened in real history too. I've heard stories of this during medieval warfare.
And there are a few deviations from the book in Martin the Warrior, because obviously they got to tone down the violence for the kids. But I think you would find in the way the end of Feldo and Badrang's duel happened in the book very interesting, movie fan. Because in the book, Feldo didn't pick up Martin's sword and threaten to decapitate Badrang with it before the tyrant called for help. No. Instead, Feldo threw the sword aside, picked up his javelin, and then brought the butt down of it on Badrang multiple times, planning to beat the tyrant to death in the same manner that he had the slaves of Marshank beaten.
Very befitting.
Mhm. And you actually heard in the book, as Feldo brought the javelin down again and again, how he was asking Badrang, basically, how does it feel?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely makes sense.
Yep.
Though both scenarios had the same problem, though. Feldo, in both scenarios, Feldo gave Badrang the opportunity to call for help.
Yeah.
He should have just straight up killed him.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's true.
Speaking of which, that brings us to the two villains of Martin the Warrior. First and foremost, our main big baddie, Badrang the Tyrant.
Mm-hmm.
Which, interestingly enough, Badrang is voiced by the same actor who voiced Clooney the Scourge in Season 1, Diego Matamoros.
That explains a lot, because I always kept feeling that he was similar to Clooney the Scourge, but I couldn't put my finger on it.
Now that you mention it, Badrang does basically show what Clooney would be like if you who made him a stoat instead of a rat.
Yep.
Which that is the type of animal that Badrang is a stoat. And for those of you who don't know what a stoat is, that's basically a bigger version of a weasel.
Mm-hmm.
Although I did hear a few YouTube commenters back in the day saying that because of the way he was drawn, they thought Badrang looked like a wolf.
And I'll admit, even before I got hooked into Redwall, even I thought that Badrang was a wolf at first until Ben cleared it up for me.
What about you, movie fan?
Well, I did think there was... I'm not sure if I really saw a wolf in him, but as I recall, he did kind of have a bit of a longer muzzle, kind of like a wolf, so I could see why they might think that. But I don't know. Truth be told, before Redwall, I wasn't familiar with stoats. You never hear about them much at all. Nobody talks about them. You hear rats all the time, badgers, foxes, owls, sparrows, and most of the animals you hear about. But until then, I never even heard of a stoat. And at that time, I wasn't researching information like that. I don't know why, but yeah.
I plan on talking about stoats at some point in the future on my channel.
Oh, good. Definitely ought to do that sometime.
Mm-hmm. And while we're still on his topic, what did you guys think of Badrang?
I'd say Badrang really lives up to his name. He's ruthless, and just like with Clooney, he shows no mercy to anybody. Though with his henchmen, with the possible exception of Scowrag, the most brutal I see with him and his minions is mostly just him yelling at them.
Yeah, that's about the gist of it.
Yeah. Whereas Clooney, he straight up beat or killed his henchmen if they stepped out of line.
Yep, that's for sure.
And yeah, and like I said at the beginning of the story, you see Badrang gathering slaves because his dream is to one day be lord of the entire eastern coast. And the story actually opens up with him raiding the settlement where Martin's tribe lived and taking both a child Martin and his grandmother Windred hostage.
Mm. Oh, dear.
And it's described in the book that the reason why you don't see Windred in the time when Martin becomes older is because during the march to where Marshank would be built, Windred eventually succumbed to death after being starved, dehydrated, and overtly beaten by Badrang and his slave drivers.
Oh, dear.
And that's one of the reasons why when he was stretched out to die outside of Marshank's gates, why Martin and made a vow then and there that if he ever got the chance to kill Badrang, he would take it.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
And of course, we can't forget the fact that Badrang stole his father's sword, and Martin had been told by Luke specifically to never let another creature take his sword from him.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And that's something I need to let you know for when we go to talk about the books that didn't make the TV show. That's another deviation, because in the TV show, when Luke the Warrior left Martin in Windred's care, he went off to fight Badrang. In the book, he actually left to fight another vermin.
Another stoat that goes by the name of Daskar, which, if you remember from my countdown of animal fantasy villains, made the number 10 spot for very good reasons we will describe later on.
Mm-hmm. Basically, what happened in the premise of that storyline was when Martin was just an infant, Vilu Daskar and his crew attacked Martin's tribe and killed many of the tribe's members. And Daskar himself murdered Martin's mother. And the worst part of it was Martin's mother, Sana, tried to fight Daskar off with a stick, but he was armed with a big curving scimitar sword. And as Daskar cut Martin's mother down, not only was he shouting his name aloud, but as he struck the blow that killed Martin's mother, he was laughing.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, that alone made sure he would at least make it into the top 10 when I was working on my Animal Fantasy Villains countdown.
Yeah, definitely. That alone is good enough.
Especially with his motto.
I do my best to be my worst.
Wow.
I did that particular voice because I feel like if he was still alive, that Vincent Price would have been a good voice for Daskar.
He probably would have.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings us to one of literally the lesser of the two evils in Martin the Warrior, Badrang's former partner in crime, Captain Trauman Josiah Cuttlefish Clog.
Or Clog for short.
I can see why. That's a mouthful of a name right there.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And as we see in the story, his main motivation is that he wants to defeat Badrang and steal the wealth that Badrang has accumulated. And we don't really get a clear reason why, but it's revealed at some point in the second episode that either Badrang or Clog left the others stranded on a reef during a storm and sailed off with their slaves.
Yeah, one common principle within the Redwall universe is that when the main baddie is either a stoat or a fox, then they rarely, but most of the time, never have another stoat or fox in their army.
Because they consider their species to be the most cunning of all creatures.
Seems to fit, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. But even though Clog does have his nasty moments, in terms of overall wickedness, he is nowhere near as evil as Badrang.
Mm-hmm.
And would you like to explain why, Thomas?
Well, he doesn't really do that much that affects the main heroes, and he doesn't nearly have as much menacing screen time as Badrang, although he certainly does have his moments. And in the latter half of the show, his purpose is to pretty much just troll Badrang to no end, very much in the same way that Statler and Waldorf would troll Fozzie Bear. In fact, at one point, I even looked at Ben and I said, I'll bet Badrang was thinking in his mind, all right, Clog, you're going the right way for a slashed throat.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And Thomas also made a very good point that Clog's treatment of his crew is different than Badrang's in many ways also. Because apart from the occasional yell, Clog treated his crew like they were his equals. Whereas Badrang was very cruel to both henchman and slave alike.
Yep, which did lead to another example of them having to clean up some stuff from the books for the kids, because Badrang's right-hand fox, Scalrag, ends up becoming a double agent for Clog, and as a result, he gets tortured. In the book, they don't reveal the exact method of torture that they use, so you kind of just got to use your imagination as to what forms of medieval torture that they use. But in the TV show, they use tickle torture, and then later, for Scalrag's demise, in the TV show, they had him hold on to a rope above the gates of Marshank, and they tickled him until he lost his grip and then fell to his death. Whereas in the book, Badrang just set Scalrag up as target practice for his archers. In fact, the book even describes that when Clog turned around and looked at Scalrag's body, it looked like a pincushion.
Because of how many arrows were stuck in it.
Oof, wow.
Mm-hmm. And then that comes to some other good characters in season 3. Most notably, Martin's love interest, Rose of Noonvale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. She and Martin fell in love with each other basically from the first moment they saw each other. And you could really get the sense that they would have been perfect for each other.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, in the final battle at Marshank, Rose was killed by Badrang.
Mm-hmm.
Which, now that I'm thinking about it, I think Rose deliberately sacrificed herself so that Martin would have his chance to defeat the tyrant.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you recall, after she bit Badrang and caused him to drop Luke the Warrior's sword, she had the opportunity to run for her life, but instead she tried to restrain Badrang while Martin went for the sword.
Mm-hmm. That's real love right there, if you ask me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Had Martin grabbed the sword first, things might have been a little different. But then Redwall Abbey would never have been founded.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Nope.
So, and then we also have some of the other side characters like Rose's little brother Brome and their mole friend Grum Trencher. Those were some pretty good characters too.
They were very much so.
Now we come to favorite moments and thoughts. What were some of you guys' favorite moments and thoughts from Martin the Warrior?
My favorite parts was basically the climax, because of how intense the action is. Then again, with a show like Redwall, you shouldn't expect any less. The scenes at Noonvale and, well, the parts where between Clog and Badrang, after Badrang makes Clog his slave, it just cracks me up of how much Clog was trolling him.
Yeah.
Of course, Clog ended up having the last laugh.
Because after the battle, he was the last vermin alive at Marshank.
Yep.
Yeah, in fact, I can see that Badrang and Clog's rivalry was so intense that while I was scrolling through stuff on YouTube, someone actually took clips of both Badrang's army and Clog's and set it to savages from Pocahontas.
Yep, they did. They did. They also did other Redwall spoofs like that too, such as playing "Be Prepared" to Clooney.
I think I've seen that. That's pretty good.
Matthias is playing with the big boys now to Asmodeus. And this and, well, several others that there's too numerous to mention.
Yeah, they even did one that I remember I saw long ago before I even knew what Redwall was, that I think has been taken down from YouTube, where they took Badrang and Scalrag and set it to "It Feels So Good to Be Bad."
That would have been interesting.
I wonder why they removed that.
My theory is that either one, copyright, which would seem unlikely in my opinion, since I've used that in my videos without any trouble, and or the fact that the person who uploaded it probably terminated their account.
Yeah, it could be. Wouldn't be the first time that's happened.
Yeah. What about you, movie fan?
Well, for me, the biggest moment would have to be the final battle itself. That was intense. Like I said before, how he ended up in a way building an army to take that fortress, and literally he's being attacked on all sides. Batarang is on this one, so
yeah, you can tell that even at the part where he said that he wasn't defeated and that Marshank wouldn't fall, you could tell that somewhere deep within his black heart, Badrang knew he was finished.
Yeah.
But as the thing with all tyrants, they refuse to accept when their time is over. Such was the case several times in animal stories that Ben and I are familiar with.
Yep. And I'm with you guys that Martin's final showdown with Badrang would have to be one of my favorite parts of this season too, because the action is awesome, and the way that the two of them are clashing swords with each other, you can tell that Martin is not playing games anymore, and Badrang's toast.
Yep,
sure.
Definitely.
In fact, there's also a little different way that the duel played out in the book too, because in the book, after Martin threw Badrang against that post, Martin actually threw the shrew sword away and then locked his paws around Badrang's grip on the sword of Luke the Warrior, and they began this kind of a struggle where Martin grappled with Badrang until he had turned the sword around so that its point was aimed right at the tyrant's heart. And it was at that moment when Badrang's nerve deserted him. He actually started to beg Martin for mercy at that point. He said, Please, don't kill me. You can have it all. The fortress, everything.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of bad guys, I noticed one case was quite interesting in the third season. That was actually the case both in the book and in the TV show. It's that Scalrag actually had a spy among the slaves.
Droop.
Hmm.
You don't see Woodlanders being villains very often in the Redwall show all series, but it does happen.
Such was the case with Droop, because if you remember, Scalrag was giving Droop extra rations in exchange for information regarding the going-ons among the slaves. And then later, after Scalrag died, Droop, instead of deflecting to the good guy's side, he basically became a spy for Bad Rain.
Hmm. Oh dear.
Yep.
But thankfully, he did end up paying the price for his treachery.
Mm-hmm. Because he was killed by Feldo when the first half of the slaves escaped from Marshank.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Although the method in which Feldo killed Droop was the same in both the book and the TV show, the location of where the spear hit him was different. Because in the TV show, Droop took the spear through his chest when he tried to kill Bill Barkjohn.
Hmm.
But in the book, Droop tried to help the horde beasts usher the remainder of the slaves back into their containment, and Feldo threw the spear, and it took Droop through the shoulder blades.
Mm-hmm. Either way, still a brutal but fitting comeuppance for him.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yep. And now we come to a topic that both Thomas and I can give our thoughts on, and maybe stir you into giving the books a try, movie fan. We're going to talk about the books in the series that didn't make the TV show. Starting with what I recently learned would have been season 4 of the TV show had things been different. Mossflower.
Basically, this one goes as at some point after the Battle at Marshank, but very shortly before the founding of Redwall Abbey, Martin came to Mossflowerwood country only to find that its inhabitants were enslaved under a family of wildcats, with the ringleader being our main villain, Sarmina Green Eyes, who poisons her father, Verdoga Green Eyes, and frames her younger brother, Gingivier, for it. And Sarmina, she earned the silver medal on my villains list for good reason.
And the gold medal on mine. Because as I told you in the live stream where I first met you, movie fan, Sarmina is the only villain in the Redwall roster that I would say is more evil than Clooney.
Yeah, you did say that. That's right.
Uh-huh. And her actions in Mossflower make her, there's no doubt in my mind, they make her the most evil villain in animal fantasy stories. Because not only did she kill her own father and frame her brother for the crime, but she is needlessly cruel to her subjects. He outright kills any members of her horde who don't follow instructions, and the thing she has planned to do for the rebels if she defeats them do not bear thinking about.
Definitely not.
Sounds like one bad villain.
Oh, yes.
And the worst part is, Sarmina doesn't even use a weapon most of the time. Most of the time when she fights, she's armed with nothing but her claws and fangs.
Wow.
And the main inquest of Mossflower is Martin is sent by one of the leaders of the rebellion, Bella of Brockhall, to go questing for the mountain fortress of Salamandastron and bring her father, Bor the Fighter, back to lead the armies of Mossflower against Sarmina. Unfortunately, Bor does not come back with Martin due to a conflict of his own brewing at Salamandastron, but Bor does do something insignificant nonetheless, because at the beginning of the book, the sword that we saw Martin have during season 3 was broken by Sarmina, leaving nothing but the handle left. So, when they got to Salamandastron, Bor reforged the blade of Martin's sword into the blade that we know in season 1 and 2. And the best thing about that is Martin's sword was not reforged out of any metal. The metal that Martin's sword was made out of came from a meteorite.
Really?
Oh, yes.
Yes. This metal came from a meteorite, and it's a metal so strong and powerful that nothing can break, chip, or damage the blade.
Wow. And that's before Avatar: The Last Airbender did that one.
Yep. And it is armed with this new sword that Martin comes back to Mossflower with an army of escaped sea rat slaves that Aves and Hares from Salamandastron to lead the Woodlanders in a final battle against Sarmina. And the battle, one of the most epic parts of Mossflower is where you see Martin and Sarmina fight each other one-on-one. I'm not kidding. A mouse and a wildcat are going in toe-to-toe each other in single combat.
Wow.
Oh, yes.
So what do you think of that?
I think that sounds pretty awesome. It's too bad they never made that into a series, because I was hoping they would try to, since they dropped back to Martin the Warrior, I was hoping they would come up with another season where it would be more like explain more about the founding and especially where he got the sword from. Obviously, that would have definitely covered the sword and roughly to where he ended up, coming to Mossflower, which is where the Abbey is, or ends up, I should say. So,
well, some of the Woodlanders Martin met during the Mossflower Wars were in fact the first mice from Loam Edge, including the first ruler of Redwall Abbey, Abbess Germain. And it was after the defeat of Sarmina and her armies that Germain and Martin collaborated with each other to build and found the Order of Redwall.
Really?
Yep. And then if you want if you want to go in chronological order or somewhat, the book that came after Mossflower was The Legend of Luke. And in that book, that was the tale of how Martin went back to the place of his birth to discover what had become of his father, Luke the Warrior, after he left him as a child.
Mm. Really?
What'd you say?
Really?
Yep. That's
Well,
yep.
Do you hear me?
And I can
Okay.
hear you. I can hear you. But yeah, in that book, Martin did return to his birthplace, and some of his father's elderly friends who had survived that adventure actually related the tale of what happened to Luke to Martin.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. And
Interesting.
And basically what happened was, after that scene where we saw Luke leave Martin his sword, which, by the way, I do have a picture of Luke the Warrior here.
Huh. Yeah.
And anyway, as I was saying, after Luke left Martin, he and his crew went on a years-long quest across the seas, hunting the pirates Velu Daskar and his ship down.
Hmm.
And eventually, the ending of that quest had both a good ending and a bad ending.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh. Well, what happened was, initially, after Luke was captured by Daskar and his henchmen, he tried to lead them back to the place where his tribe was situated, and have in hopes that Martin would lead the tribe to ambush the pirates. But by this time, Martin had long since been captured by Badrang, and the rest of the tribe had been spirited away by others or pirates.
Mm-hmm.
And the belief that his family was gone forever broke Luke the Warrior to the point where all that mattered to him now was killing Velu Daskar. And the climax of Luke's story came during a storm where Luke deliberately sailed Velu Daskar's ship onto some rocks, and the ship broke in two halves. One half carried the slaves of the ship and Luke's friends safely into the rocks, where they were wedged, while the other half of the ship, with Luke, Daskar, the majority of the Vermin crew, and Luke's friend Ranguvar Foeseeker, that half of the ship fell backwards and sank beneath the waves, drowning every creature on board.
Mm-hmm.
But you should have heard the final exchange between Luke and Velu Daskar before the ship struck the rocks, because it was a classic case of a coward begging for his life and the Avenger telling him to take his medicine. Because Daskar basically said, Spare me, Luke. Spare me, Luke. Luke, you can have it. You can have it all.
No.
Freedom, the treasure, freedom for the slaves. Take the red ship too. My word is my bond. You can have it all. Just spare my life. And Luke responded by growling at Daskar, whom he had pinned to the ship's wheel with him like this. Cowards die 1,000 times. A warrior dies only once. The spirits of all those you have slain are watching you, Vilu Daskar, and they will rest in peace now that your time has come. You must die as you have lived, a coward to the last.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Very appropriate.
Mm-hmm. And then after for the Legend of Luke, you go to different stories with different characters. Like I'm gonna go in publication order from this point on, okay?
Okay.
Book 4 of the series is Mariel of Redwall, and its premise is as such. After she and her father, Joseph the Bellmaker, are captured by pirates, the mousemaid Mariel survives an attempt on her life and endures amnesia. Upon recovering her memories, Mariel sets off for the island of Terramort to rescue her father and take revenge on the creature who tried to kill her. Sea Rat King and ruler of Terramort, Gabool the Wild.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
The book that came after that was Salamandastron, and that was the story of the Badger warrior Earthstripe the Strong, who was the lord of the mountain fortress of Salamandastron, and that told the story of how he had to protect his domain from being conquered by a horde of vermin called the Corpse Makers, and their leader, the Weasel Warlord, for Ago the Assassin. Book 7, The Bellmaker, was a sequel to Mariel of Redwall. After receiving a dream from Martin the Warrior, Joseph the Bellmaker traveled to the kingdom of Southsword to aid his daughter Mariel in liberating the Woodlanders from the oppression of the fox tyrant Ergen Nagru and his army of rats. Then Book 8, and this is a really good one, The Outcast of Redwall. You still with us?
Yeah, I'm with you. The Outcast of Redwall.
Many seasons ago, the evil ferret warlord Swart Sixclaw abandoned his infant son and left him for dead. The young ferret was adopted and named Vale by the creatures of Redwall, but he could not escape his father's wicked blood. And when Vale committed an unforgivable crime, he was banished from the abbey forever. Meanwhile, Swart Sixclaw wages war on the mountain fortress of Salamandastron, determined to settle a score with his arch enemy, the Badger Lord Sunflash the Mace.
Really?
Uh-huh. Because you see, the story went that at the beginning, Sunflash the Mace was a young badger that Swart Sixclaw had kidnapped, and to say that he treated Sunflash cruelly would be an understatement.
Yikes.
Because the way he treated Sunflash was he tied all 4 of his paws together so that he was hobbled close and forced to walk on all 4s, and he was muzzled with rawhide strips. And what Swart would do would be he would climb on Sunflash's back and force the badger to give him rides, and even though he was hobbled together and could only take slow steps, and he would ode Sunflash to go faster by hitting him with his claws, kicking him with his paws, and beating him with the flat of his sword blade. And the worst part was he had a terrible name for his prisoner. Scumtripe.
Oh, jeez.
Eventually, with the help of another prisoner of Swart, Scarlath Kestrel, Sunflash escaped from Swart's captivity, and in the process, permanently damaged Swart's left paw, which had 6 claws on it. After that, Sunflash and Scarlath made their escape, and both the Badger and the Ferret swore a vow that they would kill each other someday. And while Sunflash grew to become known as a hero throughout Mossflower, Swart grew into an infamous warlord. In fact, Swart was so cruel and wicked that one of his titles for himself was the Pitiless One.
Wow.
And like I said before, or in the middle of the book, Swart's army got a little too close to Redwall Abbey for the Woodlanders' comfort, and in the ensuing battle, the nursemaid of Swart's son was killed, and Swart never went back to look for his son. In fact, the circumstances surrounding Swart's son's birth were just awful because Swart's wife, Bluefen, had never been a strong creature, and she basically died in childbirth. And after their son was born, not only did Swart remand him into the care of an old rat wife and never have anything to do with him, but he basically had Bluefen's funeral as throwing her body in a hole, and that was it. He didn't grieve for her. He didn't care for his son. Nothing.
Sheesh.
He treated the whole thing like it was no concern of his.
That's terrible.
And yet, despite all that, after Swart's son, Vale, was banished from Redwall Abbey, the first thing he wanted to do was find his father.
Oh, boy.
So, but there was one, but basically the circumstances leading up to Vale's banishment would be a perfect candidate for you playing Not One of Us from The Lion King 2, Simba's Pride.
Really?
Because Vale tried to poison one of the Redwallers.
Oh, sheesh.
And the only one who stood up for him was the young mousemaid who raised him, Bryony. And even after Vale was banished, Bryony still held out hope that Vale had some good in him and actually went after him to try and convince him to change his ways. Which led both of them directly into the conflict between Swart and Sunflash.
Oh, dear.
So, what do you think?
Sounds like quite an interesting and very complicated story.
Yeah, well, the best.
Complicated in a good way, of course.
I still think it's a good story, though, because Sunflash is a very likable hero, and Swart. If I ever make a countdown of top Redwall villains, Swart is undeniably getting the bronze medal of evil. because he basically achieved his position of being warlord of a vast horde of vermin by poisoning the leaders of vermin gangs and then taking over once they were dead.
Yeah, I drew parallels between that and Thrax from Osmosis Jones when he killed the leader of that one germ gang to take control of the other germs, make them his gang. Only difference being that Thrax didn't poison the leader of this gang.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And Swart was very cunning about the way he poisoned too, because he didn't put the poison in the bottle. He, in order to stave off suspicion, he drank the wine from the bottle and hid the poison in a silver drinking chalice. His victims then drank from the chalice while Swart drank from the bottle, and the next day they were dead.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty cunning.
Mm-hmm. The next book is actually a sequel to Matameo, Pearls of Lutra. When the greedy pine marten emperor Eublas Mad Eyes covets the pearls known as the tears of all oceans, the young hedgehog maid Tansy seeks to find the pearls in order to save Redwall's abbot, who has been kidnapped by Eublas's minions. The next book is The Long Patrol, in which the murderous vermin army called the Rapscallions is abroad in Mossflower country. And it's up to the Long Patrol, the regiment of hair warriors from Salamandastron, and their new recruit, Tamo, to save Redwall and its creatures.
Okay.
The next book is Marlfox. When the villainous Marlfoxes infiltrate Redwall Abbey and steal the tapestry of Martin the Warrior, it's up to Danflor Reguba and Songbreeze Swifteye, children of warrior squirrels, to embark on the perilous quest to get it back. Another one of the books that Thomas has read also is Lord Brocktree.
In fact, that was actually the first Redwall book I actually read.
And because of that, I'm going to let him describe Lord Brocktree.
So basically, the Badger Lord Brocktree hears that his father, Lord Stonepaw, has been killed by a band of vermin led by the ruthless wildcat Ungat Trun, who, on a side note, is Sarmina's uncle, but I digress. But anywho, Brocktree decides to set out on a quest to rally up an army to fight back against Ungat Trun and reclaim Salamandastron.
A hero's journey.
Exactly.
Yep. And it has one of the most epic showdowns in the Redwall universe has ever seen, because you get to see a badger and a wildcat fight one-on-one with each other.
Wow.
Book 14, Tagarung, tells this tale. As a baby, the young otter Dana was kidnapped by vermin and given lessons to make him one of them. When Dana, renamed Tag by the vermin's chief, refuses to become what the tribe wants him to be, he sets off on a journey to find his true identity and home, which will ultimately lead him back to his birthplace, of Redwall Abbey and the family that feared him dead.
Okay.
Book 15, Triss, alongside her friends, Shog the Otter and Welfo the Hedgehog Maid, the brave young squirrel maid Triss escapes from the kingdom of Riftgard and the slavery of its rulers, the evil ferret king Agernu and his ruthless daughter, Princess Kurda.
Sorry.
The next book, Loamhedge, actually tells two stories in one. Ragoon and Sorrowbando, two Redwall warriors, quest for the ancient abbey of Loamhedge to find a cure for hair-maid Martha Braybuck, who has been wheelchair-bound since infancy. Meanwhile, the mighty badger warrior Lana Bowstripe seeks revenge on the sea rat captain Ragaball and his crew.
Interesting.
Book 17, Rackety Tam. The brave squirrel warrior Rackety Tam McBurl sets out with his friend Wild Doogie Plum and 100 Long Patrol hares to protect Mossflower and Redwall Abbey from the barbaric Wolverine, Gulo the Savage, and his army.
Ooh, a Wolverine. This
Yep,
sounds pretty epic.
it is. Book 18, Hyrule Lane. The young otter maid Tyria Wildlock sets off from Redwall Abbey for the kingdom of Green Isle, where she must fulfill her destiny to become Hyrule Lane, a warrior queen who will liberate her fellow otters from the oppression of the wildcat tyrant Rigu Felis and his army of slave drivers.
Seems to be a lot of slavery in these books, doesn't there?
Yep.
Book 19, Eulalia. Maudie Mugsberry Thropple, a young hairmaid from Salamandastron, sets off on a mission to find Gorath the Flame, the next lord of the mountain, who is being held captive by the vile fox pirate Visca Longtooth and his crew. Book 20, Doomwhite. The young mouse Bisky leads the search for the eyes of the great Doomwhite idol, jewels that were stolen long ago from the carrion bird cult known as the Doomwhites by Bisky's ancestor, Gonf the Mouse Thief. This is the only Redwall book where birds are the main villains.
Really?
Its main villain is a raven named Corvus Skur, who is the leader of the Doomwhite cult. Book 21, The Sable Queen. A new evil has come to Mossflower in the form of the wicked Sables Wilt the Shade and his diabolical employer, Vilea the Sable Queen. Vilea plans to conquer Redwall Abbey by kidnapping Redwall's children and forcing the Abbey residents to surrender in return for their safety. It is up to Buckler Cordine, Blade Master of the Long Patrol, to put a stop to her plans. And then the final Redwall book, The Rogue Crew. This is the last book that Brian Jacques wrote before his death in 2011. This tells the tale of how Captain Rake Nightfur of the Long Patrol and Lord Score Axehound of the Rogue Crew of Sea Otters joined forces with other heroic creatures to defend Redwall Abbey from an army of corsair vermin led by the hideous abomination of a creature called Razid Weerat.
Now, I have yet to read that book, but Ben showed me a drawing of what Razid Wee Rat looks like, and cheese and rice is it terrifying.
That bad,
Yeah.
huh?
Yeah.
It's even scarier than the giant mouse of Minsk and the hellhound combined.
Yikes.
And the reason why, I'm talking about a creature that is half weasel, half rat.
But all monster.
Wow. Yikes.
Actually, I think Thomas might have the picture I gave him with us.
I actually didn't bring that one. I only brought the pictures of the characters from who made it to the TV show.
Well, then,
it kind of slipped my mind to get the other ones.
well, that's okay. I have my phone real quick. It won't be as clear, but we'll try to, this is a rough this is an illustrator from the book's impression of what Razid Wee Rat looks like.
Can
you see it?
No, not really. It's screen's kind of glaring. I can't really.
How about now?
Well, I can make it out, but the distance isn't helping.
Sorry.
I don't think this is going to work.
Well, trust me,
I'll take your word for it.
It's the definition of hideous. Even uglier than the Wear-It from Matameo.
Here, why don't I try on my phone? Just spell that out for me. How do you spell that?
Razzid.
ID. Oh, here it is. Razid Wee Rat. Oh yeah, I see what you mean. That is creepy looking.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's the final villain that Brian Jacques created.
Boy, he really kind of got in touch with the monster story when he came up with this one.
I can believe that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, that brings us to the final set of things I wanted to talk about. You've already covered how beautiful the animation is, and I totally agree with you, as I'm sure Thomas does.
Mm-hmm.
And now, what are our thoughts on the soundtrack and the opening theme?
Well, the instrumental score, in my opinion, is very impressive because it captures the mood of each scene perfectly. And the theme song, boy, that's one of the most epic theme songs I ever heard. And it does exactly what a theme song is supposed to do. Grab the viewer's attention and give them a taste of what's in store for them.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And you could tell that it's almost like straight out of medieval music right there from the opening theme song. I've been to enough Renaissance fairs where it sounds very similar. So
awesome.
In fact, dare I say it, the instrumental score for the show is almost on par with the works of Hans Zimmer. And that's saying something quite a bit.
Yep, it most certainly is.
Definitely.
And then the big question that I wanted us to ask was, do we all think that this series is TV show and books, as I've described them, as movie material?
Absolutely.
Totally.
In fact, I even thought of a few good votes for some voice casts.
Would you like to share them, please, Thomas?
Well, for Mossflower, for Gonth the Mouse Thief, I thought of Martin Freeman, a.k.a. Bilbo Baggins. As for Sarmina, I say had she lived long enough, Eartha Kitt would have been a good pick. But then after some deliberation, I thought Michelle Pfeiffer would be good for the part.
after my description of Sarmina to you, what do you think, movie fan?
I think Michelle Pfeiffer would work, definitely.
Yeah, because I heard that, like Eartha Kitt, she was known for playing Catwoman, but so far the only villainous role that I truly do know Michelle Pfeiffer from is voicing Eris in Sinbad Legend of the Seven Seas. And on my last watching of Sinbad, just hearing Michelle's performance as Eris, I'm like, oh yeah, she'd be a great pick for Sarmina.
I would agree. I definitely agree.
And as for Lord Brocktree, I'd say that for Ungattrun, I'd vote the actor who played King Stefan in Maleficent. I think his name was Shartlow Copley or whatever. I think he'd be a perfect pick.
Me personally, I always thought Ray Fiennes would be a good pick for him.
Okay.
And for Lord Brocktree himself, I vote Danny Glover.
And my vote would be Liam Neeson.
That would also be a good pick. And there's another side character in Lord Brocktree, a hare named King Bucko Big Bones. Ben and I both agree that the perfect pick for him would be Billy Cannoli,
a.k.a. King Fergus from Brave, and Dane Ironfoot from The Hobbit.
As for The Legend of Luke, given that Vincent Price is no longer with us, I think I have a good vote for who should be the Lou Daskar, Ian McShane.
Oh, yeah,
because I know him for two villainous roles, Tai Lung in Kung Fu Panda and Judas Iscariot in Jesus of Nazareth.
And movie fan and I know him as Ragnar Sturluson in The Golden Compass.
Yep.
As for Luke himself, that's actually one I would pick Liam Neeson for.
Well, that one I'm not so sure about. That one we might need to give some thought on.
Mm-hmm.
After what we've told you about Luke, who would you think, movie fan?
I don't know. I've never been good at picking actors to play a role. I've always been good at, judging them when they actually do a role and then say hit and miss or good or bad, but beforehand, I don't know. I can never think that far ahead on that one. I don't know what it is.
Okay. Well, it was just a question. But I do have some good news, even though it's long overdue. Netflix gave a news report back in 2020, I think it was, that they were going to adapt Redwall and Martin the Warrior into a movie and TV show, respectively.
Really?
Mm-hmm. It hasn't happened yet, but I have my fingers crossed that it does eventually.
Yep.
Well,
and if they decide
do it justice, hopefully.
Yep. And if they decide to do the original Redwall book, then I know a few good picks for it. Patrick Stewart to be Abbott Mortimer. For Basil, I'd have to say either John Cleese or Eric Idle. For Constance, Kate Blanchett. And for Clooney, Chiwetel Ejiofor. Chiwetel Ejiofor. He was Victor Sweet in a movie called Four Brothers, and he was the one who voiced Scar in the live-action Lion King.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And Thomas also thinks that Max Charles, who voiced Kion in the Lion Guard would be a good pick for Matthias.
I could picture that one.
Mm-hmm.
And he also wondered, and among the more humorous ones, he wondered about Jim Cummings being the voice of Brother Methuselah.
Because Jim Cummings is such a great voice actor that I don't see why he can't add wise old mentor figure to his repertoire.
No, I don't see why not.
And this last pick that he had, I thought was kind of a good parallel because of his performance as Smaug in The Hobbit. Thomas thought about Benedict Cumberbatch for Asmodeus.
Now that could work if he taps into his inner Smaug and not the Grinch.
Oh, but if he tapped into that, then we get 3 villainous animals that were voiced by Benedict Cumberbatch in the same menacing manner: Smaug, Asmodeus, and Shere Khan.
And technically he wasn't an animal, but he was still a scary monster. Benedict Cumberbatch wasn't just the actor who portrayed Doctor Strange in the film of the same name. He was also the voice of Dormammu.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the YouTube commenters made an interesting point that in voicing Dormammu, I think Cumberbatch used his Smaug voice.
It's been a while, but I think he did too. That does sound kind of similar.
Yeah, and I think he also kind of used his Smaug voice when he voiced Shere Khan in Mowgli.
That one I'm not too sure about, but
because I know of the clips that I sent you for the Dare to Compare, quite a few of them featured Shere Khan.
Yeah.
And I even rewatched Mowgli a few times in preparation for the Dare to Compare with you, me, and Bonnie, and I could tell Cumberbatch was bringing out his Smaug voice for Shere Khan. Which is, interestingly enough, I also recently rewatched The Desolation of Smaug. And I said, oh yeah, that's for certain.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, I think that about sums up everything that we could say, although I do have a couple things I want to say before we sign off. One of which that to all our viewers out there, if you haven't seen the show yet, you must check it out. Each of us, I'm sure, give this show a score of 10 out of 10.
Yep. Gold medal and a roar from me.
Yep. And I definitely would suggest that, if you take an interest in medieval history, you might want to definitely check this out and compare notes. Because even though it's a fantasy, it still is very true to how it was in medieval times. And if you catch the parts about, behind the scenes and Brian Jenks and all that, again, they're very accurate and they're very well told. And, there's one thing I got to mention, though, and that would be the whole tapestry business for all the pictures at the very end before we get to the whole educational side. I swear, even though I can't seem to find any evidence to this yet, I swear Brian Jenks got his inspiration for that, or at least maybe because did the books ever kind of come off like they were describing like a tapestry, besides the Martin tapestry, I mean, or was that just the series itself?
They talked about the tapestry several times in the book, but each time it was only but each time it focused primarily on the image of Martin.
Okay,
which
so
the image of Martin is actually somewhat different than what we got in the TV show.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because in the in the TV show, we just see Martin standing, leaning up, standing with his sword out in front and holding his shield up. But in the book, this is the image we got. Martin leaning upon his sword with a courageous look in his eye and a smile on his face, while behind him, vermin flee for their lives in all directions.
I could picture that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm positive that... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. It's all right. It's
actually described in the books that after Martin returned from the quest to find out what happened to his father, he went on one more quest before he hung up his sword. And when he returned from that quest, it was during winter. The founders of Redwall Abbey were under attack from a horde of foxes and rats led by another wildcat, and Martin was so fierce a fighter and determined to protect his friends that he faced the entire army single-handedly.
Wow.
By the time the fight was over, the founders of Redwall all found the wildcat and many vermin lying dead in the snow, and Martin was seriously injured. It was after he recovered from those injuries that Martin made the decision to hang up his sword and dedicate his life to peace.
I wondered how that came about. But yeah, and I'm sure, this only could have been done in the series. There's no way you could have done that in the book, like end a chapter by giving this idea of it being told in the form of a tapestry, because I don't see how you could have done that in the book, or did they?
Yeah, that's true.
They didn't really, but Brian Jacques did divide each part of his books into sections, though.
Oh, I'm sure he did. I'm sure he did. I mean, but I think I know where. I don't know if it was his idea or if it was just the creators of the show. I can't find any information on this, but I think I know where they may have gotten the inspiration from.
What's that?
Well, I actually before I could tell you, I got to go find something to paint the picture a little better. Be right back.
Okay. Very well. I'm sorry that you're staying past the usual time, Thomas.
It's cool. I'm actually having a lot of fun with this.
As am I.
And besides, we're recommending some pretty good stuff to our viewers.
Absolutely. I would recommend what we've been talking about to anybody.
As would I.
Because even if you're not a fan of animal fantasy, it's still a great story.
Definitely.
Anywho, excuse me. I'm going to need to get some water after this because my throat's getting a little dry.
Yeah, it happens to me a lot. I remember in speech class once in high school, I ended up having to do my informative speech in 2 separate sessions in the class, and I ended up having to drink hibiscus tea for a few days. Hibiscus tea does wonders for the throat.
Okay.
My choir teacher would tell me that.
Okay, I'm back.
What you got, movie fan?
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry, it took me a minute to find this because it was tucked away in a corner. This was something I got a hold of when I went to a flea market recently, but I'm very familiar with the story. Have you ever heard of the Bayeux Tapestry?
Not that I can think of.
No.
Oh, that's okay. I can't say I'm too shocked about it. This is something that, like I say, you have to really be into medieval history to really find out. Well, anyway, when I was in a flea market, I found this special little folio here. It's almost like a folder about the Bayeux Tapestry. The story takes place back in 1066, and this is an actual battle here. It really happened in 1066 when the Normans invaded England and took over conquered the Saxons. It is. Oh, this is just part of it. There's more.
That bears a striking resemblance to the tapestry scenes in the show.
It
does.
That's what I'm saying. And there's more. In fact, if I could find more pictures, I hope there's more pictures of the tapestry. There's more details. It literally tells the entire battle, almost word for word, practically, by how. Oh, here we go. These are black and white images, but it'll have to do. It tells the Battle of Hastings, which is when
I've heard of that.
Yep.
That's when William the Conqueror took over England.
Yep. And it gives exact descriptions as to exactly how it went. And it's extremely detailed. I've never seen the tapestry myself personally because it's in England, obviously. But from the descriptions, it literally covers wall to wall. It is that huge. And just think of this. It is painfully all stitched together, hand-stitched, describing the battle itself, even describing what led up to the battle when they were getting ready to invade. They had bundles of swords, barrels of arrows, all kinds of things. Stop biting me, George. Thank you.
Sorry, cats.
Yeah.
Bagheera does it to me all the time.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's incredible and I think that may have been part of the inspiration for that whole sequence because it makes perfect sense. It's literally telling the story as such.
It does.
Yeah, and it confirms it for me that Brian Jacques was doing his homework.
Oh,
yeah. To the best of my knowledge, only 2 times in animation were ancient art styles ever imitated for animation styles, and those 2 would be in Hercules, where they used a lot of the ancient Greek pottery art,
right.
And in the Lion King franchise, where Rafiki's paintings are very reminiscent of cave paintings left by African cultures, such as the Sand people of Botswana.
Yep. And actually, there's also videos on YouTube of Brian Jacques going around our country and giving talks about his books and his works to libraries and schools.
Oh, I'll bet.
And I've heard those, and he was not just a genius as an author, he was an all-around great man. Because he actually got his inspiration for writing Redwall because, and these are his words mostly, I didn't like what they were having me read to the children and I was reading to at the time.
I believe it.
He felt that the children's literature at that time was too angsty.
Yeah, I believe it too.
And so he wrote Redwall, and he told his audiences that there is one essential thing you need to do if you want to be an author. Learn to paint pictures with words.
That does work.
And he also demonstrated an incredible way that he could paint pictures with words too. He had one of the children hold a copy of the first Redwall book, and he would give his description of Clooney word for word without even looking at the page.
Wow.
Yeah.
I only know of one other author who ever painted pictures with words, and that would be Agatha Christie when she described her characters in her mystery novels.
Or heck, even Michael Crichton, because I read some of the original novel of Jurassic Park, and his description of Dilophosaurus was pretty interesting. He described it as having a yellow skin with black spots along it, kind of like a leopard, and then its head crests were red.
Wow. Interesting.
Of course, it didn't. While it did include the spitting venom, like it did in the film, it didn't. He didn't make any mention of a frill that popped out, like a frilled lizard.
Yeah. Well, give or take,
Yeah. Hollywood artistic license.
Yeah. And that's another thing. Like I said earlier, they only did it with season 1 of Redwall, but the episodes that don't take place in the books, they were actually pretty interesting. Like I especially liked Clooney's clowns and the visitor.
Yeah, Clooney's clowns, that got me busting up laughing, because basically the summary of that episode was a traveling circus shows up to perform at Redwall Abbey, and Clooney has 2 of his rats join the circus undercover.
You remember that movie, fan?
I do. That was a good episode. It really was.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that one well.
Yeah, and like I said, the visitor. That was the episode where Clooney used his first attempt at blackmailing to get into the Abbey.
Yeah,
because he kidnapped the wife of Farlow the Dormouse and ordered Farlow to kidnap Cornflower, or for him to trap Matthias with, in exchange for Farlow's wife's release. Which I realized that Farlow had no choice, but he quickly learned, earned a hard lesson towards the end of that episode. Clooney the Scourge's word cannot be trusted.
Nope.
In fact, the only time he ever did keep his word was in episode 13. Because it's never shown in episode 13, but Clooney actually did spare Plumpin the Dormouse's family in exchange for Plumpin getting his army into the Abbey. But I chalk Clooney up to doing that for only one of 2 reasons. One, he figured that once he ruled Mossflower, he could go after them another time. Or 2, he thought that the feeling of betraying the Redwallers was going to be torture enough for Plumpin.
Possibly.
Both very good possibilities.
Yeah.
So, do you guys have anything else you want to add?
I think I'm good.
No, just like I said, if you're into history, you might want to check this out. It makes for a good story. Dare to compare. It's fun. And and for you guys, I suggest you look up the Bayeux Tapestry. It is incredible. I'm sure you can find pictures online.
Well, I know about the Battle of Hastings because I saw the episode of Deadliest Warrior where they pitted William the Conqueror against Joan of Arc.
Yeah, I remember that. Yep, and it's pretty accurate. Although I do remember there was another History Channel show that covered that. I forget what it was called, but it was hosted by an actual general, and he did a good job of talking about it. Another one was a series called Conquest. They talked about it because they were talking about axes. They were talking about axemen of Europe and all that. And unfortunately, that one is, although it was pretty historically accurate, there was one thing they had way off. And that was talking about the axemen that were there. They were called the housecarls, as they called them in that one, but they were actually called the housecarls. And they put it down on Conquest that they fought the I'm going to say the warriors or knights of the Normans, when they would charge, allegedly they claimed that they would come out from behind the shield wall and start swinging these giant axes that were about 6 feet tall. And there's no evidence that these axes ever really existed. And they were actually the king's elite guard. So they did not come out from behind the shield wall. And they even said that it was constant attack that finally the shield wall was broken, and that's not what happened. Granted, they were trying to focus on the axemen, but false, completely false.
Yeah.
But that's for another day. Anyway, I would suggest definitely watch the series. It's a great show.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned giants swinging weapons, because that's often a lot of times an image that you'll get in the Redwall books, especially when badgers go into the blood wrath amidst vermin hordes.
Yeah, definitely.
In fact, I'll even give you an example from Mariel of Redwall, the 4th book. There was a badger lord, there was a badger lord named Ronblade Whitestripe.
Yeah.
And when he went into the blood wrath, he went up against a horde of 100 sea rats.
Wow.
He killed the entire crew single-handedly and didn't suffer hardly a scratch.
Whoa.
I'll say.
Yeah. One badger killed 100 rats.
I can almost picture that. Those badgers are tough in general, But I was just going to say,
go ahead.
I think I pretty much said all I can about this. Just definitely, I should read the books one of these days, and one of these days I'll get to it. And definitely for anybody out there, watch the series. It's great. It really is.
Oh, yes.
Well, I thank you guys very much for your time. I cannot tell you how much I appreciated you doing this. And not only was this enormous fun, but it was definitely the emotional support I needed, considering something that happened earlier this week.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, I had to put my dog to sleep yesterday, and that's one of the worst things that's ever happened in my life.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you to Thomas and Movie Fan for being my co-hosts, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Out.
Movie Fans signing off.
Alpha Lion Simba.